We have come to believe that James Asher's total physical response offers us a wonderful model for the teaching of Hebrew in our Jewish educational settings. This presentation will explain why TPR, total physical response, meshes with what we understand about the brain and learning based upon the principles of Renata Caine and Jeffrey Caine. We have a traditional way that we think about teaching and learning. Fortunately, this is beginning to shift, but it still sticks in our heads as being the way, a core way of making sure that learning happens. A teacher stands up in front of a classroom, gives information. If we're lucky, the teacher may do some games, may involve students in the learning in a variety of ways. In the case of Hebrew, especially related to prayer, the students may need to learn, 8 vocabulary words per lesson, ma'odecha, levavacha, coming out of V'ahavta, and we test the students by asking them to fill in the pages in a workbook, sometimes actually doing a test, sometimes doing it through a game, but it's, here's the information you need to know. Okay, it's a little disconnected, but we expect you to learn it because we're giving it to you. Renata Caine and Jeffrey Caine have spent a lot of time learning about how the brain learns best, and they've come up with these 12 brain-mind principles. More information about the full 12 is at the very end of this presentation. We're going to focus specifically on 4 of them, the 4 being chosen specifically because they especially help us understand the teaching of language using total physical response. So the first principle is that all learning is physiological. This really has to do with the idea that all students really have the capacity to learn more effectively when their body and their senses are involved in the learning. It's not just the teacher yapping and giving information, but it's somehow physiological. It's the entire body. So we do have ways that we think about the learning process and how we set it up. Sometimes it's individual. Sometimes it's at a computer. Reading a book, answering questions, small group work, or our traditional classroom. In each of these cases, though, we have tushies in seats, as we call it. But what we learned from Caine and Caine, and specifically in relationship to how the brain learns best, students, as well as their teachers, need adequate sensory engagement, movement, and action to really learn something. TPR, total physical response, really makes this happen. So if we tell students likpots, jump, they actually jump. Their ears hear, their body does, and that learning gets cemented in a very strong way. TPR often is only a 10 or 15 minute session within a classroom, but because we have this physiological connection going on, the learning has a chance of staying, and we've seen that it does stay much longer than when a student is just told, okay, you have to remember ma'odecha with all your might. The second principle we're looking at is that learning is inhibited by threat and enhanced by challenge. The threats can come from a variety of places. It can be the attitude of the teacher, the feeling in the building. We do talk about school climate. It's things that create a downshift in a child or an adult, someone who just kind of shuts down and says, I would like to learn this, but I can't, or they just don't understand why they cannot learn something. These threats inhibit learning. Sometimes the threats that inhibit learning are really challenges that are well above a kid. You know, here again, we'll go back to the 8 words you need to memorize in order to understand V'ahavta. And we're going to give you a test when it's done. I hate to admit it, but I cried on my way to Hebrew school when I was younger. This was probably back in the 60s, because it was so overwhelmingly hard to me. On the other hand, challenges enhance learning. Not challenges that are so far above a student, but challenges that are a little bit higher. We're at Vygotsky. And that, we'll get to this later, that create a positive feeling in the students. I can do this, and I'm enjoying this. The third principle is that a search for meaning occurs through patterning. And actually with Ivrit Bitunua, Hebrew through movement, and total physical response, we both take advantage of this, and we actually break this principle at times because it leads us to the fourth principle that we're going to talk about. But let's deal with patterning. Those who remember what happened in math back when you were very young, often you spent a lot of time on patterns. Red, red, blue, red, red, blue, red, red, blue, which can get us later to algebra and other higher levels of math. Those are patterns that we need to understand that lots in our world happens in patterns, allows us to learn and remember. Patterns are these meaningful connections. So if I say, Lalechet el haluach, walk to the board, one would have expected, my brain is expecting me to walk to the board. If I say, Lichtov al haluach, write on the board, again, that's an expected pattern. They're meaningful connections. I can do that pretty easily. Sometimes, though, through TPR, we break these meaningful patterns, and we ask students to do things that are unusual, but it makes them think. We're back to the challenge part. So we might ask them, I'm going to do this in English, stand up, jump, stop jumping, put your head on the chair, stand up, jump, jump to the board. You know, all this that is unexpected, the brain is expecting a pattern. We've pushed on it. That's part of the meaningful challenge. So we're at this idea that emotions are crucial to patterning. We can have negative emotions, but hopefully in the case of TPR, we have more positive ones. We do want to create this positive, fun learning environment. We use a lot of props. This picture is actually a bit of an extreme, but if we're doing commands related to cooking, or even, you know, put your hand on the table, lift your hand up, we have created a prop kind of a situation that allows that to happen. It's fun. Same thing when we teach students likpots, jump. We're creating this positive, fun learning environment. So really the good news for our students, and the good news for our part-time Jewish educational settings as well as our full-time ones, is that total physical response, Ivrit Bitunua, really builds upon, or is built upon, what we understand about the brain and how it learns best. Again, 4 principles were described in this presentation. There's another 8 for you. And they can be found here at cainelearning.com. We do hope that as you teach with TPR, with Ivrit Bitunua, that you do pull upon these principles, because when you understand them, they'll help you plan your lessons, they'll help you develop your scripts in a way that you really are enhancing what your children learn and how.